Welcome to my podcast. Today we're going to have an episode on types of video games and language learning. And today I have my guest, Adam. Say hi, Adam.
Hi, I'm Adam.
Can you briefly
I
introduce
guess,
yourself?
so my introduction, I guess right now I work in IT, but I lived in China for a number of years, studied Chinese, taught English, if you call that teaching English. Uh, if you can call smacking a board, repeating a word, teaching English, then that's what I did.
Yeah, so this is actually I feel like part of my motivation for this kind of podcast. So I want to post it on YouTube, but I also thought about posting it on Bilibili because, like, as you mentioned, right, their way of teaching here is not necessarily teaching.
A lot of memorization and just ridiculous, just ridiculousness all around.
I think when they think of games, they have a certain type of connotation of like fun. And like fun is for children and you can't learn with fun. So remember when we taught kids, they'd always say like to like cultivate their interest in English. That's what it was for. It wasn't for learning English. It was for making them like English.
Right.
And
It's
so
just to get them interested in,
then
you
when you
know,
think of it like a game, like, well, they're already interested in it. We don't need to use that. So,
right. Well, yeah. I mean, even those stupid demos that they made us do, that it was like, oh, we're playing all these games and all this, fun stuff just for, to get parents to pay money and
yeah.
have their children enroll. But, after the fact, it's like, oh, we're not going to do any of that.
Yeah. I want to kind of talk about why types of video game matters when you're learning the language. So, like, what kind of games do you typically play, Adam? Do you mainly do, like, single player or multiplayer?
So I've done a bit of both. Like I've done like WoW, which is
You've
World
done
of
WoW?
Warcraft. I have done WoW.
I don't like
I've
WoW.
done WoW recently, actually.
Oh. Yeah, didn't they redid an older version of WoW? WoW
Yeah, they
Classic,
did.
right?
Yeah, WoW Classic. That's what it was.
Okay.
I played with some work friends, but I only played like once or twice, and I was like,
Yeah, I'm not a
this
huge
is
fan. Just like, Final Fantasy. Like
yeah,
the like MMO Final Fantasy.
right.
I'm
Final
just not,
Fantasy
I'm not
14.
into that. Yeah, I just feel like it's kind of like really monotonous and repetitive and like I don't know. It's
There's a
not for
lot of
me.
grinding.
Yeah,
Too much grinding.
I'm not a huge fan of that.
I feel like League of Legends is a lot of
But the thing
repetitive.
with League of Legends, the reason why I like League of Legends is because one, you don't have to grind for like material to craft something, and then
Yeah,
it's different because like you don't know how other people are going to play, and so
that's
there's
true.
there's that like element of like, for example, like my friend plays Final Fantasy, and she was saying like you have to like learn how the boss fights, but like there's like an order to things, where in League of Legends there's not necessarily an order.
That's true. I mean, yeah, I feel like with the MMO or is it MMOs?
For League of Legends or for Final Fantasy?
Well, just for like Final Fantasy or
Final Fantasy is MMO, and then League of Legends is a MOBA, like the
yeah,
massive
like
online battle
the
arena. I think it's
yeah, it's not
massive.
like a MOBA. It's not like a
Yeah.
MOBA.
Mm.
I played I played Final Fantasy a little bit, but I just couldn't get into it. But in terms of like MMOs, they're just monotonous a little bit.
And I hate when like I did Elder Scrolls Online for a little bit, but like there's just people running behind you, and you're like seeing when you're talking to someone.
Well, yeah, I think that's just because I think with Elder Scrolls Online, you're used to playing like Skyrim, for example, where you're just by yourself.
Yeah. I kind of wish they made it a little bit like Fallout 76, where it's like there are people online, but it's limited to how many. Like, it just felt like there were so many people when I was doing Elder Scrolls Online.
Yeah, it just kind of makes your gameplay kind of feel ingenuine.
Yeah. Like, I remember you like start fighting something and then other people come and help you kill it. And you're like, oh yay! But then like a few moments later, that thing is back because it's like for the next people to come in. Like, well,
Yeah, this
that
respawns.
yeah, like that felt insignificant. Like my mark on the world is nothing. Okay.
I'm so glad I beat that boss that just respawned.
Yeah. Yeah. So like, I feel like for me personally, well, League of Legends at least, I use that a lot to learn Chinese stuff. But like other games, like if I did like a single player game, like I did Pokemon for a little bit in Chinese. But the thing that's really annoying with Chinese, and you know this, like if you don't know a word, the only way to look it up is through like a picture or like you have to draw it,
Yeah,
you know? Whereas like Spanish, that's easy. You just type in the letters, right? But if you don't know the
that's true.
sound, you can't type it in for Chinese.
Yeah, if you don't know the pinyin or,
Yeah.
you know, how to pronounce it, it's just kind of it does make it much more difficult. I think some languages are easier to learn via game than others.
Yeah, especially if you do like single player, because I feel like multiplayer games, like a lot of my Chinese I learned from meeting friends online and then we talk in game. Like we communicate vocally in game.
Yeah, which is where like the MOBAs and the maybe the first person shooters where you have like a dialogue going back and forth
Hmm.
would be easier for at least speaking and listening.
I mean, I have had some things in League of Legends where I learned through like reading because they have text on like someone's ability or like an item you buy.
Yeah.
But that's also like I can't do that in the thick of a game. Like if we're in a fight or something, I have to go outside of the game and go into like training mode so that I can go in and look.
So you
Whereas
just kind of
like
gotta wing it
a little
when
bit
you're
like
playing, or
sometimes if there's like a new ability, I can understand enough to get the gist of what's going on. And then
right?
after the game, I would go and look up like what is that ability exactly. But in the game, for example,
Yeah.
there's like new words. I'm like I don't know what that is. I can guess, but I don't know.
Can you guess based on context?
Sometimes, yeah. But even if I can, sometimes it's like you know, a lot of times when you're guessing, you have to guess based on the character, you know, like or what's in the character kind of thing. And that's not
Yeah.
always accurate, right? Like that's not always true to what the character is. So sometimes,
Right.
yeah. Or like and Luke has talked to me about this. I feel like sometimes the descriptions in Chinese seem to be really convoluted. Like in English, they're a little more direct, where sometimes in Chinese, it's like they did a really roundabout way of explaining that.
Yeah. Well, those written descriptions are probably way different than, colloquial
Yeah.
spoken Chinese, which makes it harder.
Yeah. But I feel like in terms of video games, first person shooters, like if you think about, let's say you're even in a dialogue with someone, like you have like you're playing Call of Duty and you're in a voice call with friends. Even the things you say in a game like that compared to like if you were playing Baldur's Gate 3 with people, it's going to be very different types of communication. Right? Cuz like
Right.
in a first person shooter, it's going to be usually pretty repetitive types of things and a lot of them are going to be like commands, you know, like
Yeah.
or something like that where it's not going to be like long drawn out sentences because things are fast in that game. But Baldur's Gate 3, you're going to have discussions like what should we do? What do you want to pick? And like for options in dialogue or where we're going to go kind of thing, you know?
Right. I mean, yeah, there's not as much like strategy type thinking or comprehension with first person shooters. I mean, it's go shoot that guy or, you know, come to my base and we'll shoot that guy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, even in like League of Legends, I've noticed like when I play with friends in English or Chinese, well, we communicate more in English. The Chinese players, they just don't talk very much. But even the things we say, they're very like formulaic, like on my way or like okay, let's go get this. But it's just like we do that all the time. Every game we have that.
Yeah.
Whereas an
Which,
RPG is going to be different.
right. Which doesn't, it's not very productive for language learning, I would
Yeah.
think,
I think if
to an
you're
extent.
yeah, I bet if you're especially lower level and you're getting like repetitive types of things, I bet that's pretty useful.
Yeah.
But I feel like if you're more advanced, a harder type of game with a story would probably be better for you.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like, when are you gonna use, hey, go shoot that guy in fucking real life?
It's like at the mall, hey, go
Hey,
shoot that
hey,
guy.
come to my goddamn base. Go shoot that mother guy. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
I just don't think you would, it's not super applicable
Applicable, yeah.
to applicable.
I think
Yeah,
applicable is
to
also correct. I don't know.
it's not
Apple
whatever.
teeny.
Yeah, it's not like super useful in real life. I don't think.
Yeah. And so, like, I think well, this is also like what research says, but interaction is what's important. But you can have interaction between the player and the game or the player and other players. And so, type of
Yeah,
interaction is obviously going to change kind of like the outcome of what you're getting. Like, imagine if you played a game like Alien Invader or whatever, that like Nintendo game where you're just like a little spaceship. Like, you're not going to get any language out of that.
no, I mean, like, yeah, you're playing Pong on.
Yeah, or like even like early games. I mean, I guess Mario you could kind of learn a little bit now because they actually have like stories in the game. But like early Mario, there wasn't really much going on there.
Yeah, what are you gonna learn? Like jump?
Yeah, yeah.
But
I
then there's no spoken. There's not even any spoken dialogue in Mario. I don't think.
not real
Early
now
Mario.
they do, but it's not really dialogue. It's like ho
Now,
ho,
now, but
like
woohoo,
yeah, those kind of
whee!
sounds. But like Legend of
Yeah,
Zelda, when you think about it, like they have almost like Legend of Zelda has been known for not doing dialogue. I mean, up until like
yeah,
Breath of the Wild, where they started having like Zelda talking, but like majority of the time, it's just been like those types of sounds, like ha, and then it would be written, or, they had to read. But I think even that you have the potential to learn. It's just you don't have the potential to use, right? So that would be
yeah.
very receptive type of learning, like it's being given to you, but you're not utilizing that in conversation.
That's true. There's a lot of reading in those type of games,
Mm-hmm.
like Zelda, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Like even like the newer ones, like you're not really talking much. You're just reading a dialogue that's
Yeah.
given to you, and
I mean, there can be
but
benefits to that. Like if it gives you time. Imagine if you played a game where it's like, have you played like Dishonored?
I don't think I have.
So I
Maybe
think
the
it,
first one I did.
okay, I think it's considered a first person shooter, but like there's a story in it and people talk, but you can't like,
Is it a first person shooter?
I think it's considered that. It's like an assassination game, right? But the
Yeah.
elements in the game are very first person shooter kind of. Um,
Mm.
but you can't like pause the dialogue to read it. So
Right.
like as someone's
Yeah.
talking, if you miss a point, you miss a point. You can't like go back unless you reload a game.
Yeah, they kind of give you like a countdown, right?
Mm-hmm. What do you mean a countdown?
Um, if I remember right. Well, the dialogues you have a limited amount of time to respond, right?
Well, you don't really respond in. I mean, there are some times you can respond, but you don't really respond in Dishonored
Mm.
when they're talking. There's a lot of like
Uh,
a lot of monologuing and you're listening. I mean, they do have
yeah.
some times where you can respond, like when you go to that party. What's her name? There's you go to like fancy party and you get in and then you have to find which one of there's like three sisters but they're all in a mask. You have to guess which one is a specific one.
Oh,
Is
yeah.
this ringing a bell?
Not really, but I don't remember. Are we talking about the first one?
That's the first one.
Oh,
It's like that's like mission 4, I think. I played the first one so many times. That's like
it's
it's when you
it's been a
go,
while.
you're in the city, it's at night, and that's when you first meet those giant walkers, you know?
Okay,
You know what I'm talking about?
I think so.
I feel like we're not
It's
thinking
been
of
a
this.
while.
I feel like are we thinking of the same game? The guy with the
I
mask,
think so.
Corvo, you know?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
yeah.
He has like magic powers. He can like
Yeah.
turn into a rat.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's when I can't think of her name, Lady something, but there are three sisters and they wear a black one, a white one, and a red one. And it's like the same outfit, just different color. And it's like a mask with a hat and a dress. And you have to
Yeah.
figure out which one, I think it's Lady Boyle. You have to figure out which one is Lady Boyle. And then you can choose to assassinate her or you can choose to like get rid of her in a non-lethal way.
Oh,
There is a dialogue there where you kind of ask them questions, but other than
right.
that, I feel like there's not a lot
Mm.
of like talking back and forth in the game. Another thing too is like context and relevance to the player, and this kind of has to do with interaction. But like if you have vocabulary in a game or like concepts in a game, but you don't even use them in the game, like they're just given to you, and then you are never using them. You're never actively involved in like deciding what to do with them. That's not a very good way to remember or learn something.
Like what, for example?
Like, so if we took Baldur's Gate 3, for example, so like that's a game that has a lot of context and relevance to the player because the player
Yeah,
chooses what they do and they get to choose how their adventure unfolds. Um, whereas like Legend of Zelda, while it's a great game, you don't really use the anything in the game. Like you don't use any type of vocabulary in the game. So like you're not
right.
deciding. I mean, unless you're actively thinking to yourself, okay, they just said this, I have to go here. But you're not talking to anyone else in the game. You don't choose a dialogue option. You don't.
Right, you're just following quests and
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Whereas, like, even in Baldur's Gate 3, if you played alone, if you played single player, you still have options where you talk and.
Right. I was thinking about this earlier. You know, playing in your own language first and then playing in another language might be
Mhm.
easier, especially
Yeah,
with a game like Baldur's Gate.
yeah, for sure. Because then you have a general idea of what's going on.
You're not totally like confused as like what the plot is, at least. You can have an idea of what, at least, you have a kind of a concept of what's going on
Yeah. Do you
in your own
remember?
language.
Do you remember at when we were at Grand Valley, we were doing language classes. You had to do like the language lab. You had to get so many hours a week or something. Remember that?
Yeah, yeah,
So when I was doing, I mean, I was doing four languages, so I was in there all the time. And when I was doing Spanish, I was like, I'm gonna watch Aladdin. Like I've already seen it, I saw it as a kid.
yeah.
I just remember Jafar when he thinks he gets that like that what didn't he think he got the lamp or something, whatever he thought he got. And he's like, Toda mia, like it's all mine. Like I just remember that scene in Spanish. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And like yeah, like there were times that when they were talking in the movie that I didn't quite understand it, but I knew what they said in English, which made it easier to kind of guess what they were saying.
Yeah, I think it kind of goes, even beyond games in that aspect. Like,
Hmm.
you watch it in, say, your native Chinese and you watch it in Chinese first, and then you watch it in English. It's just gonna be easier to understand because you know the context of everything.
Yeah, I think the only problem I could foresee with that is like if you did a game like Baldur's Gate 3 and your run in Chinese would be a little different. I mean, it's not like totally different, right? The main ideas of the story are all there, but like small details would change, especially if you changed your class or your race,
Right.
and then you go in the game. Like if you started the game as a human and then you go in as a tiefling, your people are going to be very racist toward the tiefling, right? So then they
Well,
might not
that's true.
understand
Yeah,
that.
yeah. And you get special dialogue
Hmm.
options based on your race,
In class,
at
right?
least for some races. Yeah, and class.
There's this other thing that it's kind of brought up in the study, one of the studies we're gonna look at, cognitive load, which is like how much your brain can handle at a time. And
Yeah.
certain games will have higher cognitive load demands than other games. So if you're like, for example, League of Legends has a high learning curve when you first get started because there's just so much all at once. And I would say
Right.
Baldur's Gate is really similar to that. Like I am a gamer, but when I started Baldur's Gate, it was kind of difficult at first. Like I actually had to look up videos, I had to like read things because I didn't quite understand I didn't do like Dungeons and Dragons stuff before.
Yeah.
And so like those kind of games, if you imagine if you're like trying to learn a language while also trying to learn a game at the same time.
Yeah. See, that is a lot. I mean, I have kind of I played other Dungeons and Dragons games before, so Baldur's Gate wasn't as intimidating,
Mm.
you could say,
Yeah.
uh, in terms of learning curve. But like when I played League of Legends, I had no idea what I was doing.
Yeah, it's a lot. And even if someone tells you, like, I had a friend I was playing with once, and I was telling him, like, you need to back up because these people are missing on the map, and I guarantee you they're going to you because you're pushed out. And like, even though I told him
Right.
that, it just didn't register for him. He said, okay, and it didn't
Right.
do anything. And then they came and killed him and he died. He's like, what the like, what do you think's gonna happen? Like, I just told you. But it's just, there's
Right.
so much going on. I think it's really hard for like, he might have heard me, but like processing what I said probably didn't happen. So with cognitive load, there's three types that the research talks about. This was the harder study that we read. So you have like
Mm.
intrinsic load, which is just like, that's in the material itself. So like the cognitive load it requires to understand the material. So like, I would say
Okay.
Baldur's Gate 3 would be high intrinsic load, because if you don't know
Yeah.
that game, it's going to be hard to get into. Then you have extraneous load. Extraneous load doesn't contribute to learning, and you can alter it with instructional design. So if you know there's like extra things. So for example, like in the game, let's say the hard thing to get kind of acquainted with, you'd say like, maybe people don't understand how abilities work, or they don't understand how to use the hotbar. The hotbar itself would be intrinsic load because it exists in the game, but like extraneous load might be like navigating the bar. And so like, I might teach them before they play the game how to navigate the bar to lower the extraneous load.
Uh,
And then you have germane load, which is like the leftover, that's what you would need to learn. So like,
okay.
that's the load that like makes it so that you can learn what's going on. And we'll kind of get into that a little bit in the study. But and the last thing too is personalized learning. So in the one study we read, they made a game that was like personalized to certain students, like what they were trying to do in the course.
Right.
And like, personalized learning, obviously, I mean, think about like right now with AI, how people are afraid of AI taking over, especially like teachers. But like, this comes from the idea that like AI can personalize what you're trying to learn. Whereas like
Mm.
for teachers to do that, it takes a lot of energy and effort.
Right.
Um,
It does. I mean, you have
and
to like
uh,
know each student and know
yeah,
what their learning needs are and everything.
plus I feel like, even for myself, I mean, I don't know, because when I do lessons in classes here, you can kind of personalize learning if you give them options. And
Yeah.
I think that's I mean, in China, I mean, you know this, but like,
Right.
we've had so many meetings in my department about like getting students more involved in class and da 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 da, and they want us to teach like critical thinking, but I know they don't know how to do it. I know they don't know. I know they know what it is, but whenever they tell me they're doing critical thinking activities, it's always like, yeah, we did a discussion. Okay, but what is a discussion to you? Because when you say discussion, like when they say it, they mean students write a script and read it. That's not a discussion.
Yeah. Right.
So, like when I do discussions, anything is free game. You want to use Chinese. I don't care what language you're using. The point is getting these ideas out and like thinking about them. That's what I want. Not like, and a lot of students will write scripts, and I hate it. And usually when they write a script, I'll even ask them. I'll ask the entire class, did anyone understand what they just said? No. Okay. Well, then I'd rather you say this in Chinese. You wrote a script that's far beyond your own level. Like, you looked up many words, you know, and so if it's beyond your level, it's going to be beyond
Right.
their level. Now nobody got anything out of it.
Yeah. Nobody understands what, I mean, why would you, what's the point of reading a script when no one understands it?
But the thing is they're kind of taught to do that, right? Like, when we graded exams here, they had like a written portion, and I was told that I was grading too hard. And I was like, I feel like I'm grading pretty fair. But it's because they grade things based on like, does the text look nice? Like, does the style of your writing look nice? Not even is the writing good. Does it look nice? That's points. And then, is your grammar okay? Doesn't have to make sense. It just has to be good grammar. So then
Yeah.
if you have those two things, you're pretty set. Like, you're gonna get close to full points.
See, to me, that doesn't, that's not like adequate
It's not.
grading scale.
No, but it's what they do. And then I like challenged it. And of course, they're like, "Oh, you don't know. You're a foreigner and you're not that like experienced with teaching." It's like, "Okay, if you add my time in college and my time teaching, it's 20 years. So, why don't you back the up, Missy?" Cuz like, even when we talked about doing critical thinking activities, and I was like, you know, if you give students options, like, well, we can't do that. How do we test that? What do you mean? How do you test that? if you so for example, we have to do British history, and
Yeah.
I'm talking about colonization, but I give them an overview, and then they have to do a writing assignment. They pick the country, they pick the area. So let's say they want to talk about India. You can pick anything in India that is involved with colonization. You can talk about what happened in the past or what's going on now. Doesn't have
Right.
to be specifically this one thing. And then if you're going to test it, you literally could just have an open-ended question like, what are the long-term effects of British colonization and how do they affect people now?
Right.
Right? And then it's like you use whatever you looked up to talk about it. Why does it have to
Yeah.
be specific? And they're very like, well, they have to know facts first. They're learning facts on their own. Why do I need to sit there in class and lecture them on facts? They can do that on their own. It takes like 2 minutes to look things up.
Yeah, it doesn't really benefit them in terms of language learning.
I would say it doesn't either, but they think it does. And this is kind of why we get into this like personalized learning. Like personalized learning has much better outcomes because the people you're invested in it, right? You're doing what you want to
Right.
do. Imagine
Yeah.
if we played Baldur's Gate, and what's your least favorite class?
Uh,
I
it's a good question.
feel like mine's Bard.
Really? You don't like Bard?
I don't know.
I guess Ranger, maybe, or
Okay,
what the arrow, the bow one.
so we're gonna play Baldur's Gate. You have to play Ranger, and then we're gonna make you play your least favorite race as well. You know, it's like you'd
Right.
probably still get some enjoyment out of it, but you're obviously not gonna be as invested as if it's like this is the character I want to play.
Yeah. Well, I think personalized learning is also an issue in America too. It's not just China.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I remember like watching a video of you've probably seen it. It's this guy. It's like in high school. He's got long blonde hair, and he's like talking to his teacher because she's making him do a packet, like a got like a packet of
Yeah.
things to do. He's like, you gotta come in here and what did he say? Like, frickin' inspire him and like that, you know?
Oh, yeah. Is that like a TikTok or whatever?
Yeah, because she was saying like, this is my paycheck, which is like, I don't really care. I just want to get paid. But
Right.
oh, you gotta touch his freaking heart. That's what he says. But
I
it's
mean,
true.
even thinking about like back when I was in high school or elementary even, I don't I don't remember any personalized learning strategies being applied for
Yeah.
us.
I feel like I didn't really get personalized learning until later in college.
Yeah.
Like way
And
later, like toward my master's degree.
right. I mean, even like doing your bachelor's, like it's you go to your class, you do the work that's given to you. There's, hundreds of students. They're not gonna take the time to, you know, delve into each one student and say, hey, this is how we're gonna personalize your learning. You know what I mean?
But to be honest, I feel like personalized learning isn't actually that complicated. I think people just overcomplicate it. For example, in
Yeah.
Chinese class, rather than saying like do this worksheet and like translate these sentences or do this, it'd be more like here's the theme we're going for this month. Like let's say our topic is on work and employment. We want you to find a job ad that you might be willing or wanting to apply for, right? Like okay, that means you can look for
Yeah.
something in your field or something you're interested in rather than everyone looking at the exact same thing.
There are a few cases where we had that, but
Yeah, I just feel like generally, I remember my language classes, and I feel like a lot of them, not all of them. Like when you got more advanced, it wasn't so much like this, but I feel like the early level ones. But even with early level, you still can give them options. There's still things you can do to make it
right.
easy. It's just I think teachers don't know how.
Yeah.
And this, I
That's
actually
that's
want to
probably
do
true.
an episode on this because I feel like it's kind of weird to me that college teachers don't have to be certified, but like other educators do. You know?
You just have to have a master's or doctorates.
Yeah, and
I
even
mean,
then,
that is a lot of education, but
yeah, but almost everyone on my teaching team has a doctorate. And
right.
although it's kind of sad because almost none of their doctorates are related to English education. Like one lady's English literature. Okay, that's not the same as English language education. One lady's cultural psychology. Another lady's communications. Like these might be somewhat similar. Like of course you're going to be touching upon these types of concepts, but like you're still not learning how language is learned. You're not
Right.
learning teaching methods for language learning, and then you just assume like I have a doctorate, so
Yeah, it's not super relevant.
That's
Their
like,
doctorate isn't super relevant to
yeah.
language learning.
But that it's kind of like I think it's called Nobel Prize syndrome, where people who win a Nobel Prize start to think they like know everything now. And I feel like that's kind of like what it is. Like your background is not in this at all, and you're gonna sit there and talk like you think it is. You look stupid to people who are educated.
Right. That's true. I mean, makes sense.
That's like that lady at my old job, just talking out of her ass all the time, and people are like, "Oh, she's so smart." I'm like, if you guys knew anything about anything, you'd know she's an idiot.
I think part of it is just ignorance. They
Yeah.
don't they don't have that, you know what I mean? They don't have that education, so they don't, they think they know it,
I feel like I would also
you
say
know.
it's a lack of self awareness. I get laughed at in meetings here because I ask questions. And it's like, I
Yeah.
know if I'm asking, there's someone else in this room that also doesn't know, and you're going to pretend like you know. That's stupid to me. You're stupid.
I mean, what are they laughing at though? Like,
Because I don't know. But I don't care if I look stupid because I know I'm not stupid because I'm willing to ask. Like, they had this competition here, and it was like, I think it was called like the achievement award or something like that, and so you could apply and like basically say these are the things I achieved this year or while I've been at Wuhan. And I was like, how do you get voted for? Like, is there a panel of judges or like how is this? And they said students vote. I was like, okay, but how do they vote? Like, is it my class that vote? Like, who's voting for me? And she's like, oh, like you'll have like a little blurb about you and your achievements, and I think a picture of you, and then students vote for you. I'm like, that's a popularity contest. If people vote for me and they don't know me, they're voting for me because I'm a foreigner, they think I'm attractive, or someone else said that I'm good. But it has
yeah.
nothing to do with my achievement, you know? So it's
No.
like that doesn't seem like a very valid way of like choosing this award. Someone's going to get it who may not deserve it because the way you're going about it isn't very fair.
Right. They're just going based on looks and a few lines of,
Yeah, the little blurb thing.
accolades or whatever.
Yeah. And then when I said something, they all laughed. And then they just carried on. So then, like, I'm sitting next to this woman, and I was like, you agree with me, right? She's like, yeah, just this is just what they do. She studied abroad, so she's different, right? Like, she's got more of like Western types of mindset. And so when I
Right.
said that to her, she's like, yeah, it is stupid. She's like, just there's nothing we could do. No one's gonna change anything about it, even if we talk about it all day. So the first study I want to talk about is called Incorporating Personalized Learning in a Role-Playing Game Environment via SID Model, a pilot study of impact on learning performance and cognitive load. So SID is Situational Instructional Design, which I think is a form of personalized learning. So they're just like based on the situation of what the student is doing, the instructional design will change. This design was a pilot study, an experiment, and typically, do you know like when they do pilot studies, like what they would do them for?
I I would guess that's just a basis.
Yeah, to fly a plane. Yeah, so usually if you're going to do like a large study, you want to test the study first. So you can kind of think of
Yeah.
the pilot study as like a test to see if it's going to work. And so
Like a
like
pilot episode in a TV
yeah.
show.
Yeah. So like if there's like problems or maybe something comes up like, oh, we didn't think of this. Because if you start a large scale study and it messes up in the middle, you're kind of effed in the A. Yeah, so it was experiment, one group repeated measures, so that means that one group they would do like before and after, right? So you do the thing twice. And they're trying to investigate the effect of personalized RPG on students' performance and cognitive load. And the game they played was RPG Maker MV. So I think the researchers made the game that was going to be used for the course. So they designed how it would work. The participants was kind of confusing because in this study it said like 41, but then so they got 41 like consent from 41 people, but then it says they had 6 male and 22 female.
So they didn't actually have 41 people doing it.
Yeah, so I think they had 41 consent and then others dropped out. Is my
Hmm.
guess. So then they probably were left with 28 participants, 6 male, 22 female. And they were 24 to 35 in a workforce education program at a large university in the Midwest. So I think their workforce education was like leadership because their class, they had a thing on leadership in the class. So I think it was like leadership in the workplace.
Hmm.
So it was a 16-week program. And the game was implemented in week 5. And so in week 5, they introduced situational leadership theories to students, so that the game was around situational leadership. And then academic performance was evaluated. So they had like pre-test in week 4 and post-test in week 5. And then they measured cognitive load with a survey, which sounds silly, but the survey was validated by another researcher, which means they like tested it and showed that it was reliable, or I
Yeah.
should say valid. So then they're actually measuring cognitive load with the survey. I don't know how that works. I didn't see the survey, but that's just what they said. It was validated. I think this is pronounced Likert. I guess it could be Likert. I don't know. So it was like a 9 Likert scale question. So those are the types where it's like 1 to 5 or like 1 to 7 you
Oh,
choose. Like 1 is, not, and then 7 is like great or something.
gotcha.
So they measured 3 types of cognitive load. And then it was given before and after the intervention. So I think they took the survey twice. So we'll talk about this in a second, but like this can cause a problem with research if you're giving, like you give a test before and they take the test again. It's like, did they actually learn or did they learn the test? Like,
Yeah.
and they kind of talk about this a little bit. Also, they had to use a non-parametric test, which you probably don't know what this is, and that's okay. Did you take statistics in college?
Not in college,
Okay.
in high school.
You did? You took statistics in high school?
Yeah.
Oh my God. I think the most I did in high school was like up to geometry or something. I don't
Yeah.
remember. When you have a distribution, if it's not normal, you usually use a
Hmm.
non-parametric test to test for like significance. If it is normal, then you would use a parametric test. Basically, they're both good, but a non-parametric test is harder to generalize because your population is not it's not normal distribution. So it could be like the exception to the rule, so to say. So if we find significance with this, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be true for everyone else because our group is not normally distributed.
Right. So how valid is that study then if it's
It's valid.
using
It's
a
just you have to be careful how. So, for example, let's say we found significance. Somebody else should try to replicate it, but doing a larger study, right? To make
okay.
to try to get the distribution more normalized. So the results, they found that the cognitive load survey was found to be reliable. There was significant difference in learning performance. So before and after. So before they did the week 5 treatment, and then after
Hmm.
the learning performance was different. There was a negative weak correlation between performance and intrinsic load, which means if your intrinsic load is high, your performance is going to be low. I remember intrinsic load
Right.
is like
Yeah,
the
it's
the
the
stuff that's like in the material, like the difficulty in the
hmm
material, and then negative moderate correlation between performance and extraneous load, which again, if your extraneous load is high, your performance will be low, which makes sense, right? Like if you don't have enough brain power to do something, like
Yeah, I mean if you're getting overloaded, it's
yeah.
not gonna perform well.
And then there was positive strong correlation between intrinsic load and extraneous load. So typically, if one of them's high, the other one's high. If one of them's low, the other one's low. And then personalized learning in an RPG environment is effective for improving learning performance. And they kind of speculate it's because it reduces extraneous load, which then gives room for the germane load. Like if you have lower load of one thing, you have more room to do something else, right?
Yeah, makes sense.
And then decreased extraneous load could leave more germane load capacity for learning, but it does not necessarily lead to performance improvement. So they said that even if you have germane load, like you have the capacity for it, you have to be motivated to do it. And
Mm,
so motivation is also kind of a factor here.
interesting.
And then they said they found no relation between extraneous load and germane load, which implies the RPG environment is the reason germane load was increased. So basically, it implies that motivation was what was causing it, not necessarily the amount of cognitive load.
So if they wanted to play the game, pretty much
Yeah.
they
So
had better
if,
results.
yeah, like if they were invested in it, even if the game's load was high or low, might not necessarily matter.
Yeah.
But like I said, there are issues. So they had no control group. I mean, they're trying to do an experiment, but there's no control group. So it might not even be the
Mm,
game. It could have been something else. There's no way to tell because they didn't have a non-treatment group.
okay. That's
Um,
not good.
yeah. And then because it's non-normal distribution, you can't really generalize it. You can compare
Yeah.
it, like you can compare it to other studies. So like say like there is another study that found the same thing, and that study did have normal distribution. You can say well, like okay, well then, I mean we both found it. What did you think about that one? That study?
It was interesting. Some of the terms went over my head, but it was interesting to see that they did find some correlation with the game, you know,
Yeah.
adding, to their learning. After what you said, it's hard to say like whether that was actually the game or not, but
With this one too, the study is more, I think I could use the word robust than our second study. There was a lot of stuff, like I even had to look stuff up in this first one because there was a lot of stuff that
right,
they talked about. Like they had a lot of different concepts in there.
they did.
And then even the like going over the results, I had to read the results like two or three times because sometimes it felt like it was worded a little weird, but also it's just a lot of information to kind of take in all at once.
Yeah, it was.
But the second study, I don't know. I feel like the second. This is part of the thing with publication. I don't understand publication that well. I haven't published yet. But like sometimes it feels like certain journals have like no standards for publication. And then other times it feels like they have really high standards.
Yeah.
So like this second study is called Influence of Video Games on the Acquisition of the English Language. And that's by Winaldo and Oktaviani, 2022. So this design was a survey. So it's a quantitative survey. They had 5 questions that were multiple choice answer. I don't know
Right.
if it was validated. I think they mentioned something about having they took the survey from someone else, but I don't quite remember. Normally, if you're doing research and you use an instrument that was validated, that gives you more credibility because somebody else
Okay.
basically tested it to make sure it's valid. But if you do your own,
Right.
it might not be invalid, but if you didn't test it, you don't really know.
Yeah.
This one, their participants, they just said students from English education batch. I don't know what that means.
They didn't give it an amount either.
No. And then it says like 2018 Technocrat Indonesia. So I know it's from Indonesia. I don't know what an
Yeah.
English education batch is. I think they're university students, so maybe they mean like this like group, like for example, like the 2024 graduate students, like maybe they mean that,
Yeah.
but I have no idea. And then their method was they had those 5 questions. So the questions were, do you think games can improve English language skills? In your opinion, what genre of games can help to learn English? In your opinion, can a dialogue improve the player's English skills? Is the ability to speak English very influential to carry out the instructions of the game? And then, in your opinion, is learning English through video games effective? That was it. So I mean, it just gave out a survey, right? Like,
Right. Which, I mean, compared to the other one where they actually had them play a game that they made with like personalized learning, it doesn't compare very well.
yeah, I don't
I
think so
mean,
either. Well, I'll just get into the results. So for question one, which is, do you think games can improve English language skills? They had 71.4% say yes, and then 28.6 said probably. So no one said no, but they said like we think for the most part they will. And again, they're asking students this, okay? They're not asking researchers. This is kind of important. So they're
right.
asking them a question, do you think games can improve English skills? That's not
I mean, which
proof, right?
if you were asked that question, what would you answer? I mean, like more than likely, yes.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, I'll answer yes because like I play games and I'm doing research on it.
Yeah.
But yeah,
But I mean,
if you
even
ask
the
general
general
people,
person,
yeah.
I think more than likely they'd say yes. Just, based on playing games, if you played it in another language, you're gonna learn something, right?
Yeah, yeah, especially we have this idea of like immersion, right? And I feel like people always think if you're immersed, you're going to learn, which isn't always true, but
Yeah,
because of that, they're probably likely to say yes.
right.
And then they asked, in your opinion, what genre of games can help to learn English? RPG got 33.3%. Open world was 28.6%. Then they had light novel. I don't know what they mean by that. I think they might mean like
Yeah, I
the
don't know.
kind of like interactive novels they have for I don't know what they mean. That was
Hmm.
33.3%, and then first person shooters was 4.8%. But again, I it's just funny because like when people see like even if you look at the conclusions they make in this study, they'll say things like that shows that video games are effective at like learning the language, but how you just asked people's opinion,
Yeah,
like you didn't actually test anything.
right. It's just a question, like, And that doesn't prove anything.
Yeah, like if everyone said no, would you say that that means no one can learn then because everyone said no?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
this is what I mean. Like, this study was, I feel like this is not a good study. It's a good study if you want to understand what people think about it, but it's not a good study just to show if it's, like, this is influence of video games, but we're not looking at the influence of games. We're looking at the belief of the influence of games.
Right. There's no like concrete proof for,
Yeah.
people actually playing games and like saying, "Hey, I actually learned English from this game. That's great."
Yeah, like the first one, the first study, they did have that, right? Like they had like we're
Yeah.
gonna do a game and we're gonna test you to see like how you've learned after the game.
Right.
Yeah, I don't
Which
know.
is a lot more viable in terms of research, I think.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like I don't know how this got published. I don't know
Yeah.
because it doesn't seem like there's much here. The third question was, in your opinion, can dialogue improve the player's English skills? 66.7% said more better than before. I don't know how that answers that question. But this is the multiple choice. 28.6 said more and less. I think they mean more or less, but they
Yeah.
said more and less. And then 4.7% is less than before. So maybe they're saying,
Hmm.
like, if you play a game, 66.7% of people said your English will be better after playing the game, I think.
Yeah.
And then 28.6 said maybe. Maybe sometimes, maybe not. And then 4.7 said no, it'll be worse than before. Which, why would it be worse than before? I don't
I
know.
just don't think it could be worse. Like
This is why
you're
it's
playing
like,
the game in another language. Like how are you not learning anything?
oh, and even if you're not learning anything, why would it be worse? Like, you've now lost
Yeah.
things. You've now forgotten things.
Now I can't even say hola.
Yeah.
Fuck.
This is why it's like, I think it's really important when people do research to validate things or to use validated instruments. When I taught psychology in high school in Beijing for a little while. And
Yeah.
I was talking to them about like when you do interviews with people, you always want to ask behavior questions first before attitude or belief questions. Because if I ask you something like,
Yeah.
do you think it's good to eat healthy? And you're like, yeah, who's going to say no? Right. And you ask all these like healthy type questions. And then I say, do you go to the gym? There's a
Right.
really good chance people will exaggerate how often they go to the gym because they're going to feel guilty
Right.
because they just spent time saying about how being healthy is so important. And,
Yeah.
so it's like you have to
Yeah.
think of these things when
So
you're
if you
doing.
said do you go to the gym first,
Hmm.
it might lead to different results.
Yeah, like, do you go to the gym? Yes. Okay, how often? And then you start saying, like, do you think living a healthy lifestyle is important? Like,
Right.
you're more, it's just,
Yeah.
yeah, because your answers can kind of influence themselves, right? Like, as you're
Yeah.
talking.
Makes sense.
Question four was, is the ability to speak English very influential to carry out the instructions? So, like, do you need to know English to be able to do like, follow the instructions in the game? 95.5% said yes, 4.5% said no. I think some games you don't need to know the language to do.
Yeah.
Like some
I
games
mean,
you can
like you're
guess.
playing Tetris
Yeah. Or Mario.
or Mario
I would
or
even say
like,
even Zelda to a degree, right? Because there's like a map marker. You just go there. You just,
yeah,
like you could figure it out.
you click through it, you're like, I'll just go to the next marker.
But like Baldur's Gate 3, I'm talking about this a lot because I'm designing the course for it. But there's this guy in my class, like in my online class, who just,
Hmm.
I don't know if he's got beef with me or what, but he's just constantly trying to like prove me wrong.
Yeah.
So we were talking about using. I was saying like using Baldur's Gate 3 to learn English, and he was saying like, well, that's like really difficult because people can just like, you don't really have to do the dialogue. You can just like skip through it in the game and blah blah blah. I'm like, well, that's true, but it's also really confusing if you do that.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, you could change totally different your whole story could be a whole different if you
yeah.
click through it.
And even if you click through it, again, like if you're doing solo play, probably not an issue. But if you're clicking through it, that doesn't mean you're clicking through it for everyone. I mean, it depends on the dialogue, but like
Yeah.
people are going to get mad at you. Your party members are going to get mad at you. Like it's going to influence
Right.
your own gameplay and your experience if you're going to do that, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you click through it and you didn't know what it said, for example, you're like trying to recruit Karlak for or somebody, like you could totally not recruit them
Mm-hmm.
if you just click through the wrong dialogue options.
Yeah. Or end up fighting.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, it could go a lot of different ways. So
Yeah. Yeah, so I don't know. I just that guy. The guy too, he's like we were talking about using writing and reading, like learning reading and writing from video games, and he was saying about how like cuz I was saying like when you're doing reading, you want to make sure that the questions that are being asked if you're going to do like comprehension type questions that they are there's like six types of questions, and if they're one of these six types it's good, but like even there's two within the six types that aren't bad but they're not necessarily good for comprehension or good for like getting in
Hmm.
depth. And I was explaining this in my thing, and then he responded. He's like, "Our lived experiences are so different. I'm so used to all teachers I know how they use interrogatives, like you mean questions, but they use questions to like ask students about reading." I'm like that, but that's what I'm saying though. People use questions and don't realize they're not good questions. Like that's what I'm trying to tell you, you know. Like, and he's a teacher, he's an educator. Like, I feel bad for your students. Yeah.
Yeah.
The last question was, in your opinion, is learning English through video games effective? So 40.9% said yes, 59.1% neutral, and there were no one said no. But again, their conclusions for this was like that essentially proves that you can learn English through a video game. But how does it prove
Right.
that? And even I don't like using the word prove. I mentioned this in the last video I did, but I do not like using the word prove in science because how many times have we proven something and 10 years later we find evidence that suggests it's not entirely true?
Well, it doesn't prove might not be the right word, and it doesn't. What's the word? It doesn't like back up your hypothesis,
Yeah, support. So like
right?
typically this is why like when I talk about research, I usually say like it implies, suggests, like
Yeah.
something like that, or supports a certain theory or hypothesis. But I hate,
Right.
and even researchers will use the word prove. Like this,
Yeah.
this proves that this, but it's like, does it really prove that? And even if it
Not
did,
always.
like even if it did prove, like let's say the first study where they actually did an experiment, if you proved it, you only proved it within a very, very, very limited context with specific people,
Right.
right? So it's like it's not proven for all people of all time. It's proven for these people in this specific time, which could change tomorrow. Like, you know?
I mean, there's only certain things in science that are like technically proven, like
Yeah.
gravity and like, you know, certain things like that
Like the earth
that
is
you'd
round.
consider. Yeah, well.
Yeah.
Well, Kim Kardashian said it was flat.
Oh my gosh.
It's just the stupidest. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if the word prove is the right word to use with research, especially research like this.
Yeah, I would say like if you want to say prove, maybe like hard sciences are better at doing that.
Yeah.
But even then it gets kind of iffy. Like if you're doing like neuroscience, like even then there's still stuff that's so complicated with it you can't quite prove, you know?
Right.
Like the network for
It's true.
example of neurons and stuff, like it's so like there's 86 billion neurons, and then think about how many connections between all those neurons, like
Right.
yeah.
It's a lot.
So issues and limitations with this one was they had conclusions of causation, saying like this causes that, but there was no experiment. So you can't
Yeah.
you can't say that. That'd be like me saying like it's sunny outside. That I speak Chinese because it's sunny.
Yeah. I mean, it's just questionnaire, right? I mean, you can only gather so much from that.
Yeah, and the thing with those types of when you use surveys, you're usually assessing beliefs of some sort or attitudes
Right.
towards something or people's perception. Even when you structure a survey like the sentences and the verbs. So for example, like they ask, is learning English through video games effective? Well, first of all, define effective, right? Like what is effective? Because
Hmm.
if you ask this question to Chinese people and say, is using flashcards effective? They're going to say yes. But how effective is it?
Right. There's a quantitative amount of effectiveness
Hmm.
to everything, you know.
Yeah. Well, like,
Is hitting a board and saying the a word effective. Oh yeah, it works really well.
yeah.
Yeah, we love it. It's what we do all the time. Well, no, it isn't, Cindy. It's not effective.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. It's like, I think people conflate or mix up something that works with effective.
Yes.
Like if I spill coffee on a table and I wipe it up with a cloth, does that work? Yes, but it's not
Yeah.
clean,
Right.
right? I have to use like water or soap or like a cleaning solution to actually get it off.
Yeah, you gotta Lysol that bitch.
Yeah, and so like people, when you say like it works, they think that means effective, and for me, effective means long term and like consistent.
Right.
So if you're gonna if learning with flashcards was so effective, I think like people would like learn really well with it, and it would like pick up quickly.
Yeah. Well, we'd have multiple people with, many more people bilingual if they could just learn from a flashcard.
That's true. Plus, I feel like the entire Chinese population that is learning English would be fluent right, like now, and they're not because they spend their whole education learning with this type of method.
Yeah. It's outdated. It's not effective. I
No.
mean, based on how many people actually can speak, conversationally fluent English in China,
Mm-hmm.
I would say not effective.
Yeah. Yeah, so limitations, like I said, they're concluding causation, but there's no experiment. And then they also, we don't, who are the participants? How many of them are there?
Yeah.
They don't even say in the
They don't
survey
know.
results. Like, I don't know, 71%, is that out of how many people? You know, like,
Out of 10 people, like,
yeah, did you do 1,000 people? I have no idea how many people are involved
yeah.
in this. Between these two studies, I guess, like, what do you feel like how effective it would be to learn from a video game?
Well, based on the one that just asks a survey, I would say, if you're just going off of that, okay, yeah, maybe if I believed other people's opinions, I would say, yeah, I'd be sure, okay, I can learn English from video games.
Hmm.
But there's not like a concrete, you know, evidence or anything behind that says,
Mm-hmm.
that actually is true. The other one is a bit more believable. Is
Mm-hmm.
that the word?
Yeah. I mean, I would agree with that.
Uh, Even though it has its kind of limitations and it's not the standard,
Mm-hmm.
it's not the standard what do you call it?
Well, it's a pilot study, right? So I guess like,
Yeah. So I mean it's not like a full study, but
mm-hmm.
they definitely put a lot more effort into that.
You can tell for sure they put way more effort into it. Like
Yeah.
this survey thing, almost feel like somebody did it for a class. Like they just said, why not
Yeah.
publish it?
I don't know how they got that published. That's crazy to me.
It depends on the
But
journal, I think.
yeah, the other one is definitely more credible. I think, in my opinion, I think you can learn another language. It definitely comes down to your motivation.
Mm,
I played Baldur's Gate in English. Now, if I wanted to play again in Chinese, I think I definitely would learn a lot more Chinese
mm.
if I played it again. And like, if I played League of Legends in Chinese, I would just say, "F it, I don't want to do this."
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Well,
know what
you're
I
not
mean?
even
So,
interested in it in English, right? Like,
well, that's what I mean. Like, it,
yeah.
it comes down to like personal motivation and like what the person's goals are with their language learning to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
Like, are they actually interested in learning English or another language, for example, Spanish or Chinese or whatever it is, doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
Like, are they actually, are their goal is to learn more? Well, yeah, then playing a game in that language would be beneficial to them.
Yeah, I feel like with video games, a lot of it too has to come down to like how the game kind of situates you in a world. So if, like imagine if you came to China, but you came with a tourist group with a guide,
Yeah,
compared to like if you came here to immigrate here to work. Like your
right.
experience will be very different. And that also means
Yeah,
your like opportunities to learn will be different. And I think games can do the same thing. Like people, a lot of it, like I would say the naysayers see video games as like a waste of time. But like if you actually look into it, they are immersive worlds, right? Like
Right.
you get caught. There's this, just like a movie. Like if you can learn from a movie or a book, why can't you learn from a video game?
Yeah.
They're the
I mean,
same
it's all the
concept.
same. Yeah, it is.
And I did read one study how like even video games, they'll follow this like I can't remember what it's called, but movies do it. It's like a certain type of trajectory arc. So you have like Act 1, 2, and 3, and it's like how the movie is written. So you have like this like sets the stage kind of thing. Then you have like the climax, and you have all these things, these parts. Video games do the
Yeah,
same thing,
they do.
especially Baldur's Gate 3 because they literally have acts. They have Act 1, 2, and 3. Like
Yeah. I mean, it definitely depends on your game you're
yeah,
playing.
yeah. But they
Um,
still have this idea of a story, right? Like, and they, like they want you to have like investment, emotional investment into the character.
right.
So I would say based on the research I've done, and then even my own language learning, and like, I mean, I'm a gamer. Story is really important. If it's a boring story or a story that's like really complicated and convoluted, you're probably not going to learn too much from it.
Hmm.
And then if it's a game that does not require interaction either with the game world or with other players, you probably won't learn very much either.
Right.
And then
Which,
context matters. So like one of the things I did read about games is what they do really well is they give you vocabulary in context, which a lot of times like learning programs do not give them in context. They get them decontextualized. So it's like here's the vocabulary before you do the reading. Learn it now. That's decontextualized
that is
vocabulary.
true.
And oftentimes, if you're getting vocabulary in the game, when you get it, you usually need to use it around that time. Like you'll be encountering it around this thing. It's not like you learn it now and then 20 years later you'll do it, you know? Whereas like
Yeah.
I feel like in language classes, it's always like we're gonna take 1 to 2 classes to learn all the vocabulary first, and then a week later
Hmm.
we're gonna do the story.
Yeah.
So if
That
you
is
can,
a really good, that is a really good point because, I didn't think about that when learning language. You're like, oh, I've got to learn all the types of weather today.
hmm
Like, what? Why the heck am I learning this? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
it doesn't have any context to like your own environment, unless it's raining outside.
yeah,
But like in a game, if someone says, "Oh, look," you know, they're talking about the weather or something like that. It's definitely more useful.
yeah.
You're getting kind of like in that space, and like it seems better to me. But
Yeah, well, it almost feels like if you were in the real world and had a conversation in the real world,
right,
right? Like people are going to be
right,
talking about immediate things around them.
yeah,
And I even remember like when I did, I mean, I took 4 languages, and I remember like when we normally want to learn the vocabulary first before doing class readings, but that still kind of decontextualizes it. You're learning it outside
hmm,
of a context, and then you
right,
you might look at it in a context, but it's not the same. And there have been studies on this with like implicit types of learning or explicit types of learning, and like to learn vocabulary, you want to see it. Paul Nation says between 5 and like 16 times in a context, though,
yeah,
like in context,
right,
because it can change meaning.
yeah,
I mean, think about the English word bitch. Context changes that meaning really quickly,
yeah.
right? Like
It's true.
if I say like stop bitching, or if I say like you're a bitch. I mean, you're a bitch can change based on tone, but like those are two different
Right,
ideas.
they are. I mean, context is huge. I mean, even like when we learned, if we learned about like exercise, for example, in Chinese class, like none of that is really useful until you like go to a gym in China and try to like freaking learn how to like have a trainer, which is
Hmm
what I did. And like there's a lot more you don't know. There's just a lot more like when you're using it in the context that it's meant to be used instead
Yeah,
of learning in a small dialogue.
yeah.
Like there's so much I didn't know.
Luke,
And like
yeah, Luke and I did. We went to a trainer in Shenzhen, and I agree with that wholeheartedly. Like there was a lot of stuff we learned that like
yeah,
the Yundong lesson, the like exercise lesson didn't even get close to covering.
no, not at all.
Just like going to the
Not
doctor, like the things they teach you about going to the doctor in Chinese is not enough to go to the doctor.
a hell no. Hell
Like
no.
you can't. I like you have to gua hao. Like you have to go and get the like. I don't remember them teaching
Uh-huh.
that. Or like
No,
when you go and do certain tests and stuff like that, none of that vocabulary is covered.
none.
And that's why I think people's over reliance on class rather than like real world things is what's holding people back from learning a language. Because the class,
Yeah,
first of all, as a language teacher, I cannot teach you everything. I can't.
no,
So to expect it, and I feel like teachers and students both expect it. Like you're not going to learn unless you do this class.
right.
And I think that's part of the problem.
It is. And it's like, I mean, it's impossible to teach all of that. I mean, you just have to kind of throw yourself into the environment partly.
But I think
And this
that's the,
doesn't really relate to games at all, but
but couldn't it? Like, especially, I mean, this might be difficult, but like if you were doing, let's say, English for academic purposes, the thing is I feel like teachers don't want to do this because it's extra work. But if you can use, there are game makers you can use, just like RPG Maker, right? Like
yeah,
you can use this to create scenarios where students, it would be like a real world thing,
that's true.
you know?
I mean, you could do like a fitness trainer or,
Yeah, there's a lot of things you could do. You could even do it where you have the students make different games and then they share them with each
yeah,
other.
yeah. I do think that would be beneficial.
Yeah, I think, well, for one, I mean, I know this is true in the States. It's also true here. A lot of teachers are overworked. That's why
Yeah,
that's why that's why they like adjuncts in the States because you can work them more than a tenured professor, right? And they don't cost
right.
as much. And usually they don't get benefits. So like, or the
No,
benefits aren't
yeah,
very good.
that's true.
And so I think a lot of times they just feel like I don't want this. I'm not getting paid extra for this. Why would I care? And so this is why I feel like a lot of the teacher problems come from higher up universities,
Yeah,
administrators who are not paying and treating their staff well. And then who suffers? The students suffer. The people who are paying to go there suffer.
yeah. I mean, even for the teachers, there's no incentive to drive your students to like, have these almost, world-like experiences
Hmm.
when you could just give them a worksheet. I mean,
Yeah,
what's easier for the teacher when they're not getting paid, adequately, or you know, they're not getting the benefits to like motivate them to actually teach their students to their full potential.
yeah. And this it kind of explains teacher burnout because like I feel like when teachers start, they have that passion. Like as a teacher, I
Yeah,
like seeing students learn. But then, like,
right.
over time, if it's like I have to do all this extra work that I'm not paid for, I'm not even recognized for. Nobody even recognizes or acknowledges that I do it other than my students. That doesn't feel good.
Yeah. And your students can't give you the recognition same as, you know, your employers can or
Yeah.
your colleagues can.
Like when let's say you're going to change jobs and you get a letter of recommendation, you don't get it from your students, which is weird.
Right.
I feel like that could be like, but you get it from your employer. And if they don't care that you're doing that, why do it?
Right. Right. I mean, it'd be nice if it came from your students, but for some reason that's not seen as like
It's not as
you
valid,
know,
right? It's not as just,
credible
yeah, not as
as
credible.
credible.
Yeah, yeah. And the thing is, I feel like it's a worldwide problem,
It
right?
is.
Like,
Yeah.
I think there, in some ways, America has a better education than China, but I'd say in other ways, I think China has some things that are better than the American system, right? Like, there's kind of give and take.
Hmm.
But I feel
Yeah.
like generally, overall, a lot of education systems struggle with this. Like, they don't have enough teachers already. Like,
Right.
Both China and America, they lack teachers. And then the teachers who are there are overworked because of that lack, and they're not paid extra. And so then if they're going to leave, and then the
Nope.
lack gets bigger, and
It's a encompassing problem.
yeah. Okay, so before we go, I want to do tips. I like to do
All
tips
right.
at the end of the episode. So the tips that I have are RPGs are most likely more effective for deeper learning or vocabulary or like grammar because they follow stories. And that's the thing is you want context, and a story has context.
Hmm.
First-person shooter games can be useful if you're playing with other people who communicate with you. But if you're doing it alone and there's no communication, you might pick up some vocabulary if there's like dialogue in the game, but it's not going to be as good as if you can like use that dialogue with others. Even like
Right.
when I play League of Legends, like I've learned a lot of words, but a lot of it's been like I hear it and then I use it myself in a different context, right?
Right. I mean, knowing the words for like, uh, AK-47 isn't really useful.
Depends on who you ask. Certain words like that, like the names of guns or even grenade, like you're probably, unless you're going to war, you're not really gonna be
Right.
using that word, really. I mean, how often do we use the word grenade?
I know. Yeah. I mean,
We do use the word
it's
bomb. We use that a lot. Like I dropped a bomb on
yeah,
you, or like that's the bomb.
yeah,
Not
but
grenade though. I dropped a grenade on you. Like,
yeah, it's not as common. No.
and then games that are hard to pick up. So if they have like high intrinsic load or extraneous load, they may make it harder to have high germane load. But like that one study found was those did not have an effect on germane load, and it was actually motivation. So if it's a hard to
Right.
pick up game, a game that's hard to pick up, and you're not motivated, don't do it. But if you're really motivated to
Yeah.
do it, there will be like a high curve at the beginning, but after that, it becomes pretty enjoyable, and then you are more likely to learn from that.
Right.
From a teaching perspective, too, though, like I want to do a class with Baldur's Gate 3. There will be class times where we go through how to navigate the game, which will make it easier. Which can
Hmm.
that can also help with motivation, right? Like you could be really motivated and get into it and it's too hard and now you're demotivated,
Right. That's
so
true.
that matters. And then multiplayer games give you way more opportunity for communication than single player games do, right?
Mm. Yeah,
Especially, I mean, I have a
I'd
friend
say so.
who plays MMOs, but he doesn't really make friends in the MMOs. It's more like
Yeah.
solo. It's like single player. So like MMOs, which are multiplayer, can still be played in a single player way. And so like it's not necessarily the game; it's the environment you are in the game. And if you're in an environment
Yeah.
that has people and you're communicating, that's going to be way different than if you're in an environment where it's just you by yourself.
Well, you have to be somewhat social.
Yeah, yeah, social, yeah, and again, you can still learn from single player games. It's just the learning's going to be different,
Yeah.
you know. And let's say you're doing single player, that's fine. But if you have a group, like maybe you're in a group in a class and you're learning and you're all playing like Assassin's Creed or something, and then after you play certain parts of the game, you discuss that. That's still useful. But if you're just doing the game by yourself, it's
Right.
not as useful or effective. It's all about being together.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm just gonna say, thank you for watching this episode, and I hope to see you next time. You know.